The blizzard hit faster than anyone in Tropic Utah could have predicted, turning the November afternoon of 1883 into a white nightmare that swallowed everything in its path. Adelaide Foster gripped the reins of her wagon with numb fingers, her late husband's horses whinnying in protest as snow lashed against their faces. She had been a widow for only 3 weeks, and now it seemed the mountain pass would claim her too, leaving her 2 young sons orphans before they even understood their father was never coming home from that mine collapse. "Mama, I'm cold," 6-year-old Thomas whimpered from beneath the blankets in the wagon bed. His brother James pressed against him for warmth. "I know, sweetheart. Just hold tight to your brother," Adelaide called back, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. She had been traveling from her sister's home in Cedar City back to her small house near Tropic when the storm descended. The mountain pass that locals called Frozen Pass even in summer had lived up to its reputation, and Adelaide knew with sickening certainty that she would not make it through. The wagon lurched violently as one wheel hit something hidden beneath the rapidly accumulating snow. Adelaide felt herself thrown sideways, heard her sons crying out, and then there was nothing but cold and white and the terrible knowledge that she had failed them. She did not know how long she lay there in the snow, half-conscious, her body shielding her boys who huddled beneath the overturned wagon. The wind tore at her skirts, and she could no longer feel her hands or feet. This was how they would be found in spring, she thought dimly. 3 more casualties of the unforgiving Utah wilderness. Then, through the white chaos, she heard a voice, deep and commanding, cutting through the storm like a knife. "Hello, can you hear me? Hold on." Strong hands lifted her, and Adelaide struggled weakly, trying to explain about her sons, but her lips would not form the words. Another voice joined the first, younger and higher pitched. "Uncle Preston, there are children under here. 2 boys. Get them, Danny. Carefully now. We need to move fast." Adelaide felt herself being lifted onto something warm and solid. A horse, she realized. Arms wrapped around her from behind, holding her against a body that radiated heat like a stove. She tried again to speak to make sure her sons were safe, but unconsciousness pulled at her like a tide. "Your boys are safe, madam," the deep voice said near her ear. "My nephew has them. Just hold on a little longer. My ranch is not far. You're not alone anymore tonight." Those words echoed in Adelaide's fading consciousness as she finally let the darkness take her. She woke to warmth and the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Her body ached everywhere, particularly her fingers and toes, which burned as feeling returned to them. Adelaide opened her eyes to find herself in a bed piled high with quilts in a room she did not recognize. Panic seized her immediately. "Thomas, James," she cried out, trying to sit up despite the pain and dizziness. The door opened almost instantly, and a man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He held his hands up in a calming gesture. "Easy now, madam. Your boys are just fine. They're in the next room with my nephew Danny. Been asking after you every 5 minutes since we got you all warmed up." Adelaide sank back against the pillows, relief washing over her so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. We would have died out there." The man moved closer, his weathered face showing concern. "You came mighty close to it. What were you doing trying to cross Frozen Pass with a storm coming in?" "There was no storm when I left Cedar City this morning," Adelaide said, her voice stronger now. "It came on so suddenly. I thought I could make it home before it got bad, but I was wrong." She looked at the stranger who had saved her life. "I don't even know your name." "Preston Zimmerman," he said, offering a slight bow. "This is my ranch, the Double Z, been here going on 15 years now." "Adelaide Foster," she replied. "Those boys you saved are Thomas and James. They're 6 and 4. Her voice caught. "Their father died 3 weeks ago in a mine collapse near Silver Reef. We were coming back from staying with my sister." Preston's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Foster. That's a heavy burden to carry, especially with winter coming on." Adelaide nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The tears that had threatened now spilled over, and she turned her face away, embarrassed to cry in front of this stranger. "You rest now," Preston said gently. "You and your boys are welcome to stay as long as the storm lasts. From the sound of that wind, it's not letting up any time soon." He left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Adelaide lay there listening to the storm rage outside, wondering what she had done to deserve such mercy. She had been certain she was going to die, that her boys would freeze alone in the wilderness, and instead they were safe and warm in the home of a man who had risked his own life to rescue strangers. After a while, Adelaide heard small footsteps in the hallway, and then her door creaked open. Thomas and James peeked around it, their faces lighting up when they saw she was awake. "Mama!" they cried in unison, rushing to her bedside. Adelaide gathered them close, breathing in the sweet smell of their hair, feeling their solid warmth against her. "My brave boys," she murmured. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" "We're fine, Mama," Thomas said importantly. "Mr. Zimmerman gave us hot soup and bread, and his nephew Danny showed us a real arrowhead he found. This house is big, Mama, bigger than ours. And there are horses," James added, his eyes wide. "So many horses." "Mr. Zimmerman said maybe tomorrow, if the storm stops, we can see them up close." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Preston entered carrying a tray. Behind him came a younger man, barely more than a boy really, with sandy hair and a friendly smile. "Thought you might be hungry," Preston said, setting the tray on the table beside the bed. "Mrs. Foster, this is my nephew Danny. He's been keeping your boys entertained." "Thank you for watching them," Adelaide said to Danny, who ducked his head shyly. "They're good kids, madam." "No trouble at all." Adelaide looked at the tray Preston had brought. There was soup, thick with vegetables and beef, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. Her stomach reminded her forcefully that she had not eaten since early morning. "This is too much," she protested. "You've already done so much for us." "You need to get your strength back," Preston said firmly. "Hypothermia is nothing to take lightly. You'll eat and then you'll rest some more. Doctor's orders." "You're a doctor?" Adelaide asked in surprise. "No, madam, but I've lived in these mountains long enough to know how to treat cold sickness. Lost my parents to a winter storm when I was Danny's age. Learned then what needs to be done." The mention of his parents' death, stated so matter-of-factly, made Adelaide look at Preston with new understanding. He knew loss too, knew what it meant to have winter take everything from you. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Preston shrugged, but his eyes held old pain. "Long time ago now." "Eat your soup before it gets cold, Mrs. Foster." He ushered the boys and Danny out, leaving Adelaide alone with her meal. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. The soup was delicious, seasoned perfectly, and the bread had a crust that crackled when she broke it. Whoever did the cooking at the Double Z Ranch knew what they were doing. After she had eaten, Adelaide tried to rise from the bed, but her legs were still too weak and shaky. She managed to reach the window, pulling back the curtain to look outside. The storm showed no signs of abating. Snow fell so thickly that she could barely see the barn that she knew must be close to the house. The wind rattled the window panes and piled drifts against the walls. They would be here for days at least, she realized. Maybe longer. The door opened again, and Preston entered with an armload of clothing. "My sister left some things here last time she visited," he said. "They might fit you well enough for now. Your dress was soaked through. I hung it by the fire to dry, but it took a beating in the storm." Adelaide took the clothes gratefully. There was a simple cotton dress in a soft blue color, some undergarments, and even a warm shawl. "Your sister won't mind. Sarah would be the first to insist you use them," Preston assured her. "She lives in Salt Lake City now with her husband and their daughters. Always tells me I should be more social, have people out to the ranch. Reckon she'd be pleased I'm finally taking her advice, even if the circumstances are not what anyone would wish." He left her to change, and Adelaide stripped off the nightgown someone had dressed her in while she was unconscious. She tried not to think too hard about who that someone had been. The dress fit reasonably well, though Preston's sister was a bit taller and broader through the shoulders than Adelaide. Still, it was clean and dry, and Adelaide felt more like herself once she was properly dressed. She found her way to the main room of the house, moving slowly and holding onto the wall for support. The house was well built and spacious, with large windows that would let in plenty of light on a clear day. Now they showed only the white fury of the blizzard. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, and Adelaide moved toward it gratefully. Preston looked up from where he sat at a large wooden table, papers spread before him. "You should be resting," he said, but there was no censure in his tone. "I've been lying down for hours," Adelaide replied. "I needed to move around a bit. Where are the boys?" "In the bunkhouse with Danny. He's teaching them to play checkers." Preston rose and pulled out a chair for her. "Sit before you fall down. You're still pale as milk." Adelaide sat, grateful for his perceptiveness. She was feeling lightheaded from the short walk. "Do you run this ranch alone? Just you and your nephew?" "I have 3 hands who work for me year-round, and we take on more in the busy seasons. Right now 2 of them are in town, waiting out the storm there. Got caught on the wrong side of it when it blew in. The 3rd, old Charlie, is in the bunkhouse with Danny and your boys. He's telling them stories, most likely. Charlie never met a tale he could not improve with embellishment." Adelaide smiled at that. "How long have you been ranching here?" Preston leaned back in his chair, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. "Came to Utah Territory in 1868, just after I turned 18. Worked for other people for a few years, saved my money and bought this land in 1871. Built the house and the barn with my own hands with some help from neighbors. It's been a good life mostly." "Mostly?" Adelaide asked. Preston was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "There have been hard times, winters when we lost stock, a fire that took down the original barn. And I was married once briefly. She died of fever the first winter we were wed. That was 1873. "I'm sorry," Adelaide said, and meant it. The pain in his voice was still fresh despite the years that had passed. "We all carry our losses," Preston said, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Yours is recent and raw. I know how that feels, the shock of it. Like the world should have stopped turning, but it just keeps on going." Adelaide nodded, tears pricking at her eyes again. "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly like that. Henry and I had only been married 8 years. We had plans, so many plans. We were going to build a bigger house, maybe get some land of our own instead of just renting. And then one day he went to work in the mines and never came home." "What will you do now?" Preston asked gently. "Do you have family who can help?" "My sister offered to let us stay with her, but she has 5 children of her own and her husband barely makes enough to feed them all. I have a little house in Tropic, rented from Mr. Henderson at the general store. Henry had saved a bit, enough to see us through the winter if I'm careful. Beyond that, I don't know. I can sew and I can cook. Maybe I can find work doing that." Preston nodded thoughtfully but said nothing more. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire and listening to the storm. Adelaide found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He was a handsome man in a rugged, weathered way, probably in his early 30s. His hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they moved with surprising gentleness when he poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup. "You've been very kind to us, Mr. Zimmerman. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Preston said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same. I just thank God I was out checking the fence line when I was, or I never would have heard you in that storm." "You were out in that?" Adelaide asked, horrified. "I had just turned back for the house when the worst of it hit. I was close enough to make it back safely, but I heard your wagon, heard you calling to your boys. Could not leave you out there." He said it as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if he had not risked his own life to save theirs. Adelaide felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee. This man, this stranger, had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she had known in weeks. And he asked for nothing in return, expected nothing. It was almost overwhelming. The door burst open, and Thomas and James tumbled in, followed by Danny and an older man with white hair and a face like wrinkled leather. This had to be Charlie. "Mama, Charlie knows a story about a bear that was big as a house," James exclaimed, climbing into Adelaide's lap despite being far too big for it. "Now, I said it was big as a shed," Charlie protested, but his eyes twinkled. "Do not go putting words in my mouth, young fellow." Thomas came to stand beside Adelaide, leaning against her shoulder. "Are we going to stay here tonight, Mama? Can we?" Adelaide looked to Preston, who nodded. "The storm's not letting up. You'll be here tonight and likely tomorrow night too, maybe longer. We'll make room." "We're putting the boys in with Danny," Charlie said. "He's got a big enough bunk and they can share. You keep the room Mr. Zimmerman set you up in, madam." "I can't take your room," Adelaide protested to Preston. "You're not. That's the guest room. I built it for when Sarah visits. My room is on the other side of the house." And so it was settled. Adelaide and her boys were stranded at the Double Z Ranch for the duration of the storm, dependent on the charity of Preston Zimmerman and his household. Adelaide had been raised to be independent, to pull her own weight, and the situation made her uncomfortable despite Preston's obvious sincerity. That night, she lay in the guest room listening to the wind howl, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she had been a married woman with a husband and a home and a future that seemed secure. Now she was a widow, alone and afraid, saved from death by a stranger whose gray eyes held their own shadows of loss. Sleep came fitfully, and Adelaide woke several times in the night, momentarily disoriented. Each time, the warm glow of the banked fire in the room's small hearth reminded her where she was, and she would drift off again. Morning brought no relief from the storm. Adelaide rose and dressed, braiding her long dark hair and securing it with pins. She found her way to the kitchen where Preston was already up, cooking breakfast. "You should have called me," Adelaide said. "I can do that." Preston looked up from the bacon he was frying. "You're a guest, Mrs. Foster." "I'm an imposition," Adelaide corrected. "The least I can do is help with the cooking and cleaning while we're here. Please, Mr. Zimmerman, I need to feel useful." Preston studied her for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. "Fair enough. I'll not lie, my cooking is passable but nothing special. If you want to take over the kitchen, I won't complain." Adelaide tied on an apron and surveyed the available ingredients. There was plenty to work with, and she set about making a proper breakfast. Biscuits, gravy, bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. The work was soothing, familiar, and for a little while Adelaide could almost forget the strangeness of her situation. The boys woke and came tumbling into the kitchen, followed by Danny and Charlie. They all sat around the big table and Adelaide served the food she had prepared. The appreciative sounds from the men made her smile. "Madam, if you ever need a job, you come work for me," Charlie declared. "I have not had biscuits this good since Preston's mama passed. God rest her soul." "You never even met my mother, you old liar," Preston said, but he was smiling. "She died 30 years ago." "Well, I have not had biscuits this good in 30 years then," Charlie amended, undeterred. The day passed slowly. The storm continued to rage, and Adelaide found herself settling into an odd domestic routine. She cooked, she cleaned, she watched her boys play with Danny and listened to Charlie's increasingly outrageous stories, and she talked with Preston. He was easy to talk to, she discovered. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. He told her about his ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Utah climate. She told him about her life before Henry died, about her dreams of giving her boys a good education, a chance at something better than mine work or hard scrabble farming. "That's a good dream," Preston said. They were sitting by the fire after supper, the boys already asleep. "What would you need to make it happen?" Adelaide laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Money, Mr. Zimmerman, more money than I'm ever likely to have. Good schools cost money and I can barely keep us fed and housed. What if you had steady work, something that paid well enough?" "Doing what?" "There's not much call for a widow woman's labor in Tropic. Maybe I could take in sewing, but that's seasonal work at best." Preston was quiet for a while, staring into the fire. Finally, he said, "I could use someone to keep house here at the ranch. Cook for the hands, do the cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. It would pay $20 a month plus room and board for you and the boys." Adelaide stared at him. "That's too much. Room and board alone would be worth $15. "It's fair pay for fair work," Preston said. "And you'd be doing me a favor. I hate cooking and Charlie's worse at it than I am. The hands complain about it all the time. We've been through 3 housekeepers in the past 2 years. One quit because the isolation drove her mad, one got married and moved to California, and the last one stole from me and I had to let her go." "I don't know," Adelaide said slowly. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It would solve so many of her problems. But it felt wrong somehow to take advantage of Preston's kindness. "Think about it," Preston said. "You don't have to decide now. Wait until the storm passes and you've had time to consider it properly." Adelaide nodded, but she was already turning the offer over in her mind. $20 a month was more than Henry had made in the mines. With room and board included, she could actually save money. The boys would have plenty of food, a warm place to sleep, room to run and play. And they would be far from Tropic and the pitying looks, the whispers about poor Adelaide Foster and her fatherless boys. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day. Adelaide woke to silence, the absence of howling wind so profound it was almost startling. She rose and looked out the window to see a world transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep everywhere, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sun on the snow was so bright it hurt to look at. Preston was already outside with Charlie and Danny, digging out the barn and checking on the animals. Adelaide bundled the boys into their coats and let them out to play in the snow while she started breakfast. When the men came in, stamping snow from their boots, Preston's face was serious. "Lost 2 head of cattle that wandered too far from shelter," he said. "Could have been worse. The horses are all fine and the barn held up well." "I'm sorry about the cattle," Adelaide said, pouring coffee. Preston shrugged. "It's the cost of ranching in winter. I factor it in." After breakfast, Preston hitched up a team to a sleigh. "I'll take you home to Tropic," he said to Adelaide. "Road's not passable for a wagon, but we can make it with the sleigh." Adelaide felt a strange reluctance as she gathered her boys and their few belongings. 3 days ago she could not wait to get home. Now, leaving the Double Z Ranch felt wrong somehow. She had been happy here despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them. Here she had not been the tragic widow. She had been useful, needed even. And Preston's company had been surprisingly pleasant. The ride to Tropic took most of the morning. The boys rode in the back of the sleigh, exclaiming over the snow and the speed. Adelaide sat beside Preston on the driver's seat, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Have you thought about my offer?" Preston asked as they neared town. "I have," Adelaide admitted. "I haven't decided yet. It seems too good to be true if I'm being honest, and I don't want to take charity." "It's not charity," Preston said firmly. "I really do need a housekeeper, Adelaide. You'd be doing me a genuine service." The use of her first name startled her, but pleasantly. "Then I'll think on it a bit more and give you my answer soon. Where should I send word? Come out to the ranch when you've decided, or if you need anything at all, you know where to find me now." He helped her down from the sleigh when they reached her small house on the outskirts of Tropic, then carried the boys inside for her. The house was cold, and Adelaide could see her breath in the air. While Preston got a fire started, she looked around at the place that had been home. It seemed so small now, so cramped compared to the spacious ranch house. And cold, not just from the temperature but from the absence of Henry's presence. He had been gone 3 weeks, but his coat still hung by the door, his boots still sat by the hearth. The house was full of him and empty of him all at once. "Thank you for everything," Adelaide said to Preston as he prepared to leave. "You saved our lives. I won't forget that." Preston tipped his hat to her. "You're welcome, Adelaide. I meant what I said. You need anything, you come find me." He left, and Adelaide stood at the window watching the sleigh disappear down the snowy road. Then she turned to face her house, her life, and the decisions that lay ahead. The next few days were difficult. Adelaide had to face the reality of her situation. The money Henry had saved was running lower than she had realized. He had owed money at the company store, debts that came out of his final pay. And the landlord, Mr. Henderson, was already making noises about raising the rent come spring. Adelaide tried to find work in town, but Preston had been right. There was little call for her skills. Mrs. Chen at the laundry said she could offer maybe 2 days of work a week at 50 cents a day. The hotel already had a cook. The saloon offered her work, but Adelaide knew what kind of work they meant for a young widow, and she would starve before she did that. On the 5th day after the storm, Adelaide made her decision. She packed up what few belongings they had, settled accounts with Mr. Henderson, and hired a wagon to take her and the boys to the Double Z Ranch. Preston was in the barn when they arrived, and his face split into a genuine smile when he saw her. "You came," he said simply. "I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman, if it's still open." "It is, and please call me Preston. We're going to be living under the same roof. No need for formality." "Then you must call me Adelaide." Preston helped her unload the wagon, and Danny showed the boys to the room that would be theirs, a small space off the kitchen that had apparently been used for storage. It was clean now, and Danny had moved 2 narrow beds in there. "This is just for now," Preston said. "Come spring, I'll build an addition to the house, give you and the boys more room." "You don't have to do that," Adelaide protested. "I want to," Preston said. "This is your home now, Adelaide. It should feel like it." Adelaide settled into life at the ranch more easily than she had expected. She rose early to cook breakfast for everyone, packed lunches for Preston and the hands when they rode out to check the herd or mend fences. She cleaned and mended and managed the household with an efficiency that clearly impressed Preston. But more than the work, Adelaide found herself enjoying the company. Charlie was a character, full of stories and jokes. Danny was a sweet boy, eager to help and patient with Thomas and James. And Preston himself was a revelation. He was nothing like Henry had been. Henry had been loud and boisterous, quick to laugh but quick to anger too. Preston was quiet and steady, thoughtful in his words and actions. He was good with the boys, teaching them about the ranch, letting them help with small tasks. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience. And he talked to Adelaide, really talked to her. Not just about the household or the ranch, but about ideas, about the changing world beyond the Utah Mountains. He had books, more books than Adelaide had ever seen in a private home, and he lent them to her freely. They would sit by the fire in the evenings after the boys were asleep, reading or talking, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in years: intellectual kinship. Henry had been a good man, but he had not been interested in books or ideas. Preston was. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into a quiet routine. Adelaide found herself watching Preston more than she should, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the gentle way he spoke to the horses. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to kindness. But late at night, alone in her bed, she had to admit the truth. She was developing feelings for Preston Zimmerman. It frightened her. Henry had been dead only 2 months. What kind of woman was she, to be thinking of another man so soon? The guilt gnawed at her, made her withdraw a bit, become more formal with Preston. He noticed, of course. One evening in late December, after the boys had gone to bed, he sat down across from her at the table where she was mending shirts. "Have I done something to offend you, Adelaide?" he asked directly. Adelaide's needle stilled. "No, of course not. Why would you think that? You've been different these past few days, distant. If I've overstepped in some way, I apologize." "You haven't," Adelaide said quietly. "It's not you, Preston, it's me. I've been feeling confused, and I thought maybe some distance would help." "Confused about what?" Adelaide set down her sewing and looked at him, this good man who had given her and her sons so much. "About you," she admitted. "About how I feel when I'm around you. It's wrong, I know. Henry has barely been gone 3 months. I should still be in mourning, not thinking about things I have no right to think about." Preston reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Adelaide, there's no time limit on grief. It comes and goes as it pleases, but there's also no time limit on living. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you, you're allowed to feel things." "But what I'm feeling, it's not decent," Adelaide whispered. "People would talk." "Let them talk," Preston said. "I stopped caring what people thought a long time ago. Adelaide, I need to be honest with you. I'm developing feelings for you too. Have been almost since you got here. I've tried to fight it, tried to tell myself I'm just being a fool, but it's no use. When I see you with your boys, when I hear you laugh, when we sit and talk in the evenings, I feel something I have not felt in 10 years. Hope." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I don't know what to do," she confessed. "I cared for Henry, I did, but I never felt with him what I'm starting to feel with you, and that makes me feel like I'm betraying his memory." Preston stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair. "You're not betraying anyone," he said gently. "You gave Henry 8 years of your life, you gave him 2 fine sons. You have nothing to feel guilty about. And if you can find happiness again, if we can find it together, I don't think that's wrong. I think it's a gift." Adelaide looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and warmth. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. Preston turned his head and kissed her palm, and Adelaide felt something break open inside her, some wall she had built to protect herself. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Preston admitted. "But I think it might be worth it, if you're willing to try." Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Preston stood and drew her to her feet, and for a long moment they just held each other. Two lonely people who had found unexpected solace in each other's arms. From that night on, things changed between them. They did not hide their growing affection, though they were careful to be proper in front of the boys and the hands. Preston courted her in small ways, bringing her wildflowers when spring finally began to break through the snow, sitting close to her in the evenings, stealing kisses in the barn or the pantry when no one was looking. Adelaide bloomed under his attention. She laughed more, smiled more. The shadow of grief that had hung over her began to lift, replaced by a tentative joy. The boys loved Preston, and he loved them in return, treating them like the sons he had never had. In March, Preston formally proposed. It was not a grand gesture. They were in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal, when he simply turned to her and said, "Adelaide Foster, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Adelaide looked at him, this strong, gentle man who had saved her life and stolen her heart, and said, "Yes, Preston. Yes, I will." They married in April, a simple ceremony in Tropic with just a few witnesses. Adelaide wore a new dress that Preston had bought for her, pale yellow like spring sunshine. Thomas and James stood up with them, and Danny too. Charlie cried, though he denied it afterward. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Preston was patient with Adelaide, understanding that this was difficult for her, being with a man who was not Henry. But his gentleness and obvious love for her made it easier, and Adelaide found herself responding with a passion that surprised them both. "I love you," she told him afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Preston Zimmerman." "I love you too," Preston said, kissing her forehead. "You and those boys, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. That storm that brought you to my door, I'll thank God for it every day of my life." They settled into married life with an ease that felt natural, meant to be. Adelaide ran the household, raised the boys, and helped Preston with the ranch accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers. Preston expanded the ranch, buying more land, more cattle. The addition to the house was built, giving Adelaide and Preston a proper bedroom and the boys their own larger room. In the fall of 1884, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, remembering the difficulties she had with James's birth. But Preston was there for her every step of the way, holding her when the fear threatened to overwhelm her, talking to her about the future they would build together. Their daughter was born in May of 1885, a healthy baby girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Sarah, after Preston's sister, and she was welcomed with joy by everyone at the ranch. Thomas and James were devoted big brothers, and even crusty old Charlie could be seen sneaking into the nursery to coo at the baby when he thought no one was watching. Life was good. The ranch prospered. The boys thrived, growing tall and strong, learning everything Preston could teach them about ranching and horses and being good men. Adelaide had 2 more children, a son in 1887 that they named Henry Preston after both their first loves, and another daughter in 1889 named Grace. As the years passed, Adelaide sometimes thought about that November day in 1883 when the storm had stranded her at Preston's ranch. It had seemed like a disaster at the time, a tragedy on top of tragedy. But it had been the beginning of something beautiful. She had found love when she thought her heart was too broken to ever love again. She had found a home, a partner, a future full of hope and joy. Preston had been right that first night when he held her on his horse and rode through the blizzard to safety. She was not alone anymore. She never would be again. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Adelaide sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The boys, young men now at 17 and 15, were helping Preston repair a fence in the far pasture. Sarah was playing in the yard with her younger siblings, their laughter floating on the breeze. Preston rode up and dismounted, coming to sit beside Adelaide on the porch swing. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "So happy," Adelaide replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that you're mine, that all of this is real." "It's real," Preston assured her, kissing her temple, "and it's forever. You and me, Adelaide. Until the end of our days and beyond." Adelaide smiled, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about the frightened, desperate widow who had nearly died in a blizzard 12 years ago. She seemed like a different person now, that Adelaide. Though the grief of losing Henry had never fully left, it had softened with time, become a gentle sadness rather than a sharp pain. She had loved Henry, had mourned him, but she had also moved forward. She had chosen life and love and happiness. And what a choice it had been. The years continued to pass in a parade of seasons. Thomas went to college in Salt Lake City, studying law. James stayed at the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Preston began to slow down. Sarah married a good man from town, a schoolteacher, and gave Adelaide her first grandchild. Henry Preston followed his older brother to college, while Grace stayed at home, declaring she would never leave the ranch because it was the most perfect place on earth. Preston's hair went white, and his joints began to ache on cold mornings. Adelaide found silver threading through her own dark hair and lines appearing at the corners of her eyes. But they faced aging together with the same partnership that had marked their entire marriage. In 1903, on a crisp autumn day, Preston and Adelaide celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted until well after dark. Adelaide looked around at all the faces, all the love in that room, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Later, alone with Preston in their bedroom, she said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night? In the storm?" "I said a lot of things," Preston replied, pulling her close. "You said I was not alone anymore. You promised me that." "And I kept that promise," Preston said. "You've never been alone, not for a single day since." "No," Adelaide agreed, kissing him softly. "And neither have you. We saved each other, I think, in that storm." Preston smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "Best storm that ever blew through Utah territory," he said. They grew old together on the ranch, watching their family expand and flourish. Adelaide's health remained good, though Preston developed a persistent cough that worried her. The doctor said it was from years of working in the cold and dust, nothing to be done but rest and stay warm. Preston did his best to follow the doctor's orders, but he was not a man made for sitting idle. Even in his 70s, he insisted on checking on the cattle, on riding out with James to inspect the fences and water sources. Adelaide scolded him, but she understood. The ranch was in his blood, had been his whole life. On a cold January morning in 1910, Preston did not wake up. He died in his sleep, peacefully, with Adelaide beside him. He was 60 years old and had lived every day of his life with purpose and integrity. Adelaide grieved, as she had grieved for Henry nearly 3 decades before, but this grief was different. Deeper, more profound, because she had loved Preston with a depth and completeness she had not known was possible. They had built a life together, raised a family, created something lasting and meaningful. But even in her grief, Adelaide found comfort. She was surrounded by love, by children and grandchildren who supported her. She remained at the ranch, which James now ran with the same care and dedication his father had shown. She spent her days in the garden Preston had built for her, reading the books they had loved to discuss together, watching the mountains change with the seasons. Adelaide Foster Zimmerman lived to be 78 years old, passing away quietly in 1918, surrounded by her family. Her children and grandchildren gathered to remember her, telling stories of her courage and strength, her love and generosity. They spoke of the blizzard that had brought her to Preston, the love story that had seemed impossible but had endured for decades. And on her headstone, which stood beside Preston's in the small cemetery on the ranch, were simple words: Adelaide Foster Zimmerman, 1840–1918, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, never alone. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to what Preston and Adelaide had built together. The story of how they met, how a widow and her sons were saved from a blizzard by a lonely cowboy who told her she was not alone anymore, became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, because it was more than just a story of survival. It was a story of second chances, of love found in unexpected places, of two wounded hearts that healed together. It was a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest moments, hope can break through like sunlight after a storm. Preston and Adelaide had both known loss and grief. They had both been alone in the world, carrying their pain like heavy stones. But they had found each other in that blizzard, and they had chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their earlier lives. They had chosen love. They had chosen hope. They had chosen to believe that tomorrow could be better than today, that happiness was not just a memory but a possibility waiting to be embraced. And in choosing each other, in building their life together at the Double Z Ranch, they had created a legacy that outlasted them both. A legacy of love, of family, of faith in the possibility of new beginnings. The mountains stood eternal over the ranch, and the wind still blew cold through frozen pass in winter. But in the house that Preston built and Adelaide made into a home, there was always warmth, always love. Always the echo of that promise made on a stormy night so long ago: you are not alone anymore, and they never were. Not in life, not in death, not in the memories of those who came after. Preston and Adelaide's love was the foundation upon which generations built their lives, and it remained strong and true, enduring as the mountains themselves. Their story began with a storm that should have ended in tragedy. Instead, it ended with a love that transformed two broken people into something whole, something beautiful, something eternal. And that was the greatest miracle of all.